Well, hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, I'm going to be showing you how to do some inlaid dovetails. Well, quite some time ago on the show, I did a tutorial for the Leigh D4R Pro dovetailing jig, showing you how to set up and do through dovetails. And I have received multiple requests to do more tutorials for that jig. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to do inlaid dovetails. Now, if you don't know what inlaid dovetails are, it's basically a dovetail inside a dovetail where you use contrasting woods, and it ends up as a visually striking dovetail joint where the joint itself is outlined by a contrasting wood. It all starts out with some stock selection and setting up your jig. So let's head over to the bench and I'll show you what you need to do first. So I have a piece of maple here. It's approximately 5 inches wide, and of course the length will coincide with whatever your project needs to be. You also need to decide what your species is of your contrast, your inlaid dovetail. And for me, I have chosen one of my favorite combinations, maple and walnut. So the next decision that you're going to want to make is how wide your accent or your inlaid dovetail is going to be. I have chosen 1/8 of an inch. So because of that, your accent piece, or in this case the walnut, needs to be thicker than your project board or your box board by the thickness of your inlaid dovetail. So we have 1/2 inch thick for the box, and our accent piece is going to be 5/8 of an inch. We also need to cut some spacers to set up our jig. Now, in order to compensate for the geometry of the angled cut and the changing cutter depths, you can't just cut 1/8 spacers. For an 8-degree dovetail cutter, you need to make these spacers or setup blocks 1.15 times thicker than what your inlay is going to be. So in this case, it's 1/8 of an inch times 1.15, and that will end up to be 9/64 of an inch. And I've cut 2 spacers here. They are 9/64 of an inch thick. They're about 7/8 of an inch wide and, I don't know, around 4 inches long. It is also very important when cutting your stock, set up your tools, guys. Make sure that table saw blade is square. Make sure that these cuts here that you've done for your inlay and as well for your box or your project, make sure that they are square. I talked to so many people about this jig or dovetail jigs in general, and they have problems, and in the majority of cases their problems are caused because of unsquare or crooked cuts that don't allow the joint to go together properly. So now that you have everything decided here and you have your spacers cut, we need to get the jig set up. Now, this demonstration of inlaid dovetails is going on the assumption that you have a general knowledge of the Leigh D4R Pro jig. So if you do have that knowledge, you will know that this here is a spacer board that was cut with your initial setup of the jig or your initial assembly. And we will just place that on our top surface here, and we will lock that down in place. The next thing that you want to do for your setup is you want to take your fingerboard and slide it in place, and you want to slide it in place in the pins mode. And you will know that you have the pins mode if you stand in the front of the jig and look at the diagrams. The picture that is upright and looks proper to you should look like this. If you have it just like that, then you have it in the pins mode. Well, now what we need to do is get our tailboard. So at this point now, we can take our 1/2 inch thick tailboard. We're going to place it tight up to the stop here at the left side of our jig and tight up to our fingerboard, just like that. and we will clamp that in place. And once we get that clamped and we're comfortable with where that is, we can now loosen off the fingerboard, and we're going to raise it just a tiny little bit, just enough to make it so that it'll be easier to adjust our fingers. Well, it's now time to set our fingers for our routing. And on our ends, we're going to set those ones first. And what we need is to set up for our half pins. That will be the ones on the end of our board. Now, normally they are 1/8 of an inch roughly from the end. So let me just show you here. I'm going to set this one pin here at 1/8 of an inch. There we go. It's actually a little less than 1/8. But what we need to do is we need to get one of our spacers in here. It needs to be over the thickness of our spacer. So an easy way to do that is you can slide the mating finger to this one right here, up against where you've set it, tighten it down, and then loosen the one that you set, slide it out of the way, place your spacer there, slide your finger over, just like that, and then tighten it down. There you go, and there's the first half pin set. This one that you slid over, just loosen it and slide it back out of your way. So now that you have that one set, we're going to set this one on the left side. So once again, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take a spacer here or a setup block. We're going to slide our pin until it's roughly 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the board. We'll tighten that down. We'll slide its mating pin, or finger rather, over until it's tight. Loosen off the original and place one of our shims or spacers in between. We will tighten down this finger, remove our spacer, and then get this one out of our way. So we now want to set up our normal pins. So all I'm going to do is just roughly set them up so that they're equal. But for each full pin, we need to get 2 spacers in between those fingers. We'll hold them just like this. Make sure that we're still centered the way that we want on there. Hold it in place and tighten it down. And then we'll do the same thing with this last set of fingers here. We'll place our spacers in between, 2 of them, remember, because it's a full pin. We'll hold them in place and then tighten them down. All right, and for now we can just put those spacers aside. So we're going to go through tightening all of these fingers, making sure that they're completely secure, and then we can take our entire finger assembly. If you remember, we raised it up just a touch to make adjusting these fingers easier. We're going to lower it down so that it rests on our spacer board and as well on our tail board. Now at this point, we're pretty much ready to start routing, except for we need to rotate these fingers. We're in the wrong mode here because we want to route the tails at this point. So we need to turn this around, flip it completely 180 degrees, and we're going to set the scale for greater than 1 inch. And what that will do is it will allow us to pass right through our board because, of course, this board is only 1/2 inch thick. So with that setting at greater than 1 inch, that will allow us to pass right through. We need to do one little marking here, and what that will be the thickness of our inlay board. So all I'm going to do is take this inlay board, we're going to lay it up underneath here, tight to our fingers so that it's lined up with the edge of our tail board, and then we're going to draw a line right across the bottom. That is going to represent the depth of our router bit. Well, in our router, I have installed the router bit, the Leigh router bit. It's the 80-8 dovetail, and I have set the depth so that it will cut and strike right in the middle of our pencil line. And at this point now, we can route the full depth right through all of our fingers, and that will give us our tails. So let me get that done, and then we can move on with the next step. So what we need to do now is install our inlay board. So that is our piece of walnut. We're going to bring it up to our fingers, just like that, and clamp it in place. You also need to now reverse this, because at the moment we're in the tails mode. So we want to reverse this fingerboard 180 degrees to get it to our pins mode. You want to set it at the 1/2 inch mark. Now what we need to do is we need to change our bit here to our straight bit in order to cut these pins. We're also going to place a mark to represent our depth of our straight bit, and for that we're going to place our tail board here tight to the fingers and just place a pencil mark underneath there. That will give us the depth of our straight bit. So just like we did with the dovetail bit, we have the height set so that the bit cuts in the center of that pencil line that we placed on there, and now we can just route our pins. It's time to fit these two boards together. Okay, and at that point now you should have a contrasting dovetail joint. So what we need to do at this point is glue this joint together. Make sure you get good glue coverage as well. Make sure you clean up all of the squeeze out. So let this fully set, and you know what? Do it overnight and then come back to it the next day. Well, this has been left to dry overnight, and what I've done is I have now cut this off over at the table saw so that there is 1/8 of an inch of material protruding beyond the edge of our 1/2 inch board. You can see it there, so now this is 5/8 of an inch thick here. This is what you end up with at this point in time. What we need to do now is we need to adjust the fingers on our dovetail jig. So in order to adjust the fingers, the first thing you need to do, just like we did in our initial setup, is you need to flip it to the pins mode. The reason you flip it to the pins mode is to give you access to these mounting or tightening screws. So it might be easier for you to visualize if you place your tailboard back into your jig. So the first thing we're going to do is do our 1/2 pins on the one side. And the best way to do that is the reverse of what you did to set it up. So place your spacer against your 1/2 finger there, or your 1/2 tail finger position, and then slide your spare finger, its mating piece, over to the edge of that spacer and tighten it down. Now you can remove this spacer and then take your original one and slide it over just like that. And there you go. Now you know you have it perfectly set, and then you can take this one and get rid of it now. Push it off to the side. It's no longer needed. And we can repeat that process now with the other half finger on the other side, and then get rid of this one. Simple. Well, now we need to move the center guide fingers and get rid of that gap, but they have to be done evenly. You want them centered on your joint. So what you do is you take your one spacer, put it between, and we will take the right hand finger and slide it over, and then tighten it down. Then we can remove the spacer, take the left hand finger, loosen it, slide it over, and tighten it down. And then we can repeat that process for the second one. So there we go. Now your fingers are now set for the next routing process. So we're going to need to route the tails again. So we are going to flip this over to the tails side and set it just like we did before to greater than 1 inch. Now you need to set up your router, and for that we will place our dovetail bit back into our router and set the height. The height will be set the same as what we did, except you want it the thickness of your inlays higher. In other words, we had it set below here to be 5/8 of an inch deep. Our spacers are our inlays rather are 1/8 of an inch. So you want it 1/8 of an inch less than that. So we'll set it for a 1/2 inch depth. Well, it's now time to route the new tails. You've got your bit set up, just like I said. You've got your router set up. We will route these in the same fashion as we did in the first place with our first routing of the tails. You want to keep in mind here, you may get some blowouts, so don't force this bit through. Take it nice and slow, because if that dovetail joint on the walnut is not 100% perfect and it's not 100% glued in place, you could blow a piece out and you're left with something that looks like this. And what we need to do now is we need to route the mating pins for this piece here. So we're going to flip our fingerboard over here. We're going to flip it back to the pins mode. We're going to set it for the 1/2 inch mark, which is for the diameter of the bit we're going to be using. We will put our straight bit into our router, and we need to set the depth of it to match the thickness of our board here. In this case, it'll be 5/8 of an inch. So I'm going to get all that set up done, and then we can route the pins. All right, and now it's just a matter of gluing this joint together. Well, everything here is dry now, and I've given it a bit of a sanding just to clean it up, and look at how gorgeous that joint is. That is just beautiful. However, we're not done. This joint on the outside is finished, but when you do it with this method, you end up on the inside with that little tiny trim of walnut, and we need to get rid of that. You can leave it if you want. I prefer to get rid of it. So what we're going to do is we're going to clamp this in the bench, and I'm going to start off with a flush cut saw. So we're just going to start off gently and carefully dragging our saw along here to score it long enough or deep enough to get just to the flat edge of our maple here. You don't want to go too crazy. You also don't want to risk cutting it too quickly and chipping it, and then that could ruin the look of the end of your joint. Okay, we're almost there, and I'm going to stop right about there. I'm now going to flip it over and we're going to do the exact same thing on this side of the joint. And now I'm just going to get in here with a sharp 3/4 inch chisel, and we're just going to finish this off. All right, so there's part of it done. We want to trim it all the way across. I don't think we need a video of me trimming this whole piece, but I'm going to get it trimmed and then I'm going to come back and see you. Okay, and for the most part there, we're cleaned up. And that, boys and girls, is our inlaid dovetail joint. Just a beautiful, beautiful accent to any of your woodworking pieces. And there you have it. Inlaid dovetail joints with the D4R Pro jig by Leigh. Guys, this joint is time consuming. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to pretend that this joint doesn't take time. There's a lot of setup. There's a lot of switching things, going from cutting the tails initially and then cutting the pins of the walnut board, joining them together, gluing them, then having to set up all over again for tails, recutting those tails, and then joining it all together, and then setting up for the pins. It's a very time-consuming process, but the key to it all is careful setup. The other key is make sure your glue ups are good. Make sure that those joints are tight. I did have a little bit of issue on the second routing of the tails when I was routing through the walnut. I had some burning, and I'm thinking that possibly my 8-degree dovetail bit is a little dull. I may have to sharpen that. Other than that, this is a very doable joint. If you have a D4R Pro dovetail jig, I would encourage you to try this. I really would. I would not encourage it on every single project you do, because there comes a point in time when people look at your work and say, oh great, another inlaid dovetail. Does he know how to do anything else? But sporadic projects with the inlaid dovetail, they're a pain in the butt. Save them for your special projects, and you give that extra wow factor to anything you make with these. It is just a gorgeous, gorgeous joint. It's very striking. However, it can be overdone. Now, this here I did with a maple box with the walnut accents. I've done it the opposite way around. This box that I made here for a couple that were getting married was done with walnut with maple accents, and it's just as beautiful. It's just as gorgeous. So don't discount going either way, whether with a dark accent or a light accent. Change it up, mix it up. Just don't make them the same. That makes the whole inlaid dovetail pointless. But really, give this a try, guys. It's a load of fun, and if you have this jig, you know what? Please give it a try. You're going to love the results. Guys, for those of you that have inquired and asked for more tutorials on the D4R Pro, I hope you've enjoyed today's content. It's a lot of fun, and I hope I've given you the information that you need to be able to make this joint for yourself. If you haven't already, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Click that bell, and then you won't miss the notifications of future episodes of the program. Guys, I hope you've enjoyed today's content. I hope you found it to be a little bit fun. I hope you found it to be a little bit entertaining. I hope you found it to be very knowledgeable. And more importantly, guys, I hope that you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another woodworking video.